For almost 11 years, Prichard Colon's family refused to let one terrible night become the final sentence of his life. They were told the damage was devastating. They watched a young man who once moved around a boxing ring with frightening speed become dependent on others for nearly everything. They spent birthdays beside a wheelchair instead of inside an arena. They celebrated movements most families would never notice. A hand lifting, eyes responding, a smile, a reaction, a moment of recognition. And through all those years, one dream remained painfully simple. Prichard wanted to go back to Puerto Rico, not to fight, not to make a comeback, not to stand underneath championship lights. He simply wanted to go home. His father, Prichard Colon, tried to make that final trip happen. He couldn't. And on August 13, 2026, Prichard delivered the news that millions of boxing fans had feared hearing for years. Prichard Colon was dead. He was only 33 years old. His father announced his passing publicly, thanked everyone who had loved and prayed for his son, and revealed that painful, unfinished wish to bring Prichard back to Puerto Rico for a vacation. No official cause of death was disclosed. But to understand why Prichard's death has hit boxing fans so deeply, you have to understand something. This story did not begin with a wheelchair. It did not begin with a hospital bed. And it certainly did not begin with tragedy. It began with a young man who believed he was going to become a champion. And for a while, there was every reason to believe him. Before the name Prichard Colon became connected to one of boxing's darkest nights, it was connected to something completely different. Potential, speed, power, confidence. Puerto Rico has produced fighters whose names became part of boxing history, and Prichard dreamed of joining them. He was talented enough that the dream didn't feel unrealistic. By October 2015, he had built a professional record of 16 victories and no defeats. 13 of those victories had come by knockout. 16 fights, 16 wins, 0 losses. He was not some aging fighter desperately hanging on to a career. He was 23. His career was supposed to be beginning. Earlier in 2015, everything seemed to be moving exactly the way a young fighter wants it to move. He was winning repeatedly, improving, gaining attention, and building the kind of momentum that can turn a prospect into a contender. Then came October 17. Fairfax, Virginia, Eagle Bank Arena. Across the ring stood another undefeated boxer, Terrel Williams. One undefeated fighter was going to leave with his perfect record damaged. Nobody could have imagined that one of them would leave with his entire life changed. The opening bell rang. And within the early rounds, something disturbing began happening. Prichard was being struck around the back of the head. In boxing, punches to that vulnerable area are illegal for a reason. The brain does not care whether a punch looks dramatic on television. It does not care whether the crowd believes a fighter is exaggerating. And it does not care whether someone desperately wants the show to continue. Prichard complained. He pointed toward the back of his head. He showed frustration. The punches kept coming. The competitor script you shared builds its entire narrative around those repeated complaints, the referee's responses, and the growing signs that Prichard was struggling as the fight progressed. But this is where Prichard's story becomes almost unbearable when you watch the footage today. Because once you know what happened later, you stop watching it like a boxing match. You start watching it like a countdown. Every time his glove reaches toward the back of his head, you notice. Every time he looks toward the referee, you notice. Every time he seems frustrated, you notice. Every second the fight continues begins to feel heavier. In the early rounds, Prichard was still fighting well. He was still dangerous, still fast, still competitive. That is important, because severe brain trauma does not always announce itself the way people imagine. There does not have to be one cinematic punch followed immediately by collapse. Sometimes the warning signs are quieter. Sometimes the person keeps moving, keeps answering questions, keeps fighting, keeps telling himself he can continue. And professional fighters have spent their entire lives being trained to do exactly that. Continue. Do not quit. Do not show weakness. Fight through pain. Those words create champions. But in the wrong moment, those same words can become terrifying. By the middle rounds, the tension inside the fight was growing. Prichard became increasingly frustrated. He complained again. At one point he retaliated with a low blow and was penalized. That moment has remained controversial with fans because many watching the fight believed Prichard had already been trying repeatedly to draw attention to punches landing behind his head. Still, the bout continued. Then came the 7th round. This is the round that now feels almost impossible to separate from what came afterward. Prichard took another blow around the back of the head and went down. He grabbed his head. He looked hurt. The crowd reacted. Some people believed he was exaggerating. Even the broadcast commentary treated his reaction skeptically. But Prichard stayed down, holding the back of his head. Imagine knowing what we know now and watching that scene again. A 23-year-old fighter is telling everyone around him, in the only ways available to him at that moment, that something is wrong. The referee finally deducted a point from Williams. A ringside physician examined Prichard. And then came the decision that people would debate for years. Prichard was allowed to continue. That decision has haunted this story because from the comfort of hindsight, everybody wants to reach through the screen and stop the fight. You want to tell Prichard that the undefeated record does not matter. You want to tell his corner that there will always be another opportunity. You want to tell the referee that a crowd can be disappointed. You want to tell everyone around that ring that nobody will remember who won tonight if something irreversible happens. But none of us can go back. The 8th round came. Then the 9th. By now, Prichard had slowed. The young fighter who entered the ring with 16 victories was struggling through something nobody fully understood. Williams dropped him twice in the 9th. Prichard got back up. Of course he did. That was what fighters were trained to do. Get up, keep going, be tough, be a warrior. Those words sound heroic until you realize that sometimes the bravest thing a fighter can do is stop. But fighters are often the last people who can be trusted to make that decision for themselves. That is why referees exist. That is why doctors exist. That is why corners exist. A boxer's instinct is to continue. Everyone else is supposed to decide when continuing has become too dangerous. At the end of the 9th round came another strange moment. Prichard's corner began removing his gloves. They apparently believed the fight had ended. There was still supposed to be another round. By the time the confusion was discovered and they attempted to put the gloves back on, too much time had passed. Prichard was disqualified. His undefeated record was officially gone, 16-1. But within minutes, that loss became meaningless. Because Prichard was about to begin a fight that would make every boxing record look insignificant, he made it back to the dressing room. Something was wrong. He became dizzy. He vomited. Then, his condition deteriorated. The young man who had entered the arena believing he was moving one step closer to becoming a champion was rushed to the hospital. Doctors discovered bleeding in his brain, a subdural hematoma. Emergency surgery followed. And then, Prichard slipped into a coma. Not for one night, not for 1 week, for 221 days. 221 days. Think about what that really means. While Prichard lay unconscious, seasons changed. Christmas came. A new year arrived. People went to work. People got married. Children were born. Boxing staged more fights. More champions were crowned. New prospects appeared. The sport continued moving. But inside Prichard's family, time almost stopped. His parents were no longer wondering who their son would fight next. They were wondering if he would wake up. His mother was no longer thinking about championship belts. She was sitting beside a hospital bed. His father was no longer planning training camps. He was hoping his son would survive. That is the part of boxing tragedies that rarely fits inside a highlight reel. The arena empties. The television broadcast ends. The crowd goes home. The promoters move to the next event. But a family does not get to go home to the same life. For Prichard's parents, the fight never really ended on October 17, 2015. It simply changed locations. From the boxing ring to the hospital. From the hospital to rehabilitation. From rehabilitation to years of caregiving. When Prichard finally emerged from the coma, his family did not receive the miracle they had imagined in their prayers. Their son was alive. But severe brain damage had changed his life permanently. The fighter who once fired combinations in fractions of a second now required assistance with basic daily activities. The voice that once confidently spoke about boxing was largely gone. The legs that once carried him around the ring could no longer carry him independently. And the dream of becoming world champion disappeared in one night. But something extraordinary happened. His family refused to disappear with it. They stayed. His mother, Nieves, became one of the most important people in Prichard's second fight. She became caregiver, advocate, protector, motivator, and perhaps more than anything else, the person who continued reminding the world that Prichard was still here. Over the years, videos began appearing. To outsiders, some moments looked small. A movement. A reaction. Standing with assistants. Using his eyes to communicate. Interacting during therapy. Smiling around family. For the people who had been there since 2015, none of it was small. Every tiny improvement carried the weight of a championship victory. Because rehabilitation after catastrophic brain injury does not happen like a movie montage. There is no inspirational song followed by somebody suddenly getting out of a wheelchair. There are thousands of exhausting days, repetition, pain, hope, disappointment, more repetition, and families learning to celebrate progress measured in inches. Prichard kept going. Years passed. 7 years. 8, 9, 10, and people who discovered his story began asking the same question. What happened to Prichard Colon? Some searched for Prichard Colon now. Others searched for Prichard Colon recovery. Others watched that final fight and became angry all over again. According to current vidIQ keyword data, searches around Prichard's name, his final fight, his story and his status remain active, showing how strongly people continue to connect with him long after his boxing career ended. But the enormous attention also created something ugly. False death reports. In April 2025, reports began circulating online claiming Prichard had died. His mother had to publicly tell people her son was alive and in good health, urging fans not to believe fake pages using his name to chase followers, likes, and subscribers. Think about how cruel that must have been. For almost a decade, this mother had watched her son struggle through the consequences of a devastating brain injury. Then strangers on the internet began announcing his death while she was still caring for him. She had to defend the fact that her son was alive. That history is part of what made August 13, 2026 feel different. When the news appeared this time, longtime followers hesitated. They had seen rumors before. They wanted confirmation. Then the confirmation came from his father. This was not a fake page. This was not engagement bait. This was Prichard Colon telling the world that his son had left this earthly life. Prichard was 33. And then Prichard revealed the detail that may be the most heartbreaking of all. Puerto Rico. Prichard wanted to visit. His father wanted to give him that. After everything else had been taken away, it was such a modest dream. No title fight. No comeback. No revenge. No impossible fantasy. Just a vacation home. Prichard said he did everything possible to fulfill that wish. But it could not be done. And there is something about that unfinished trip that changes the emotional weight of Prichard's entire story. Because for years, boxing fans looked at him and imagined huge miracles. Maybe one day he would speak normally again. Maybe one day he would walk. Maybe somehow medical science would surprise everyone. Maybe he would recover far beyond expectations. But one of Prichard's own dreams was far simpler. He wanted Puerto Rico. He wanted familiar soil, familiar voices, familiar air, home, and he'd never made that final journey. There is another part of Prichard's story people often struggle with. Blame. Who was responsible? Terrel Williams? The referee? The doctor? The corner? The commission? The sport itself? Prichard's family pursued legal action after the injury, filing a lawsuit seeking $50 million and alleging negligence involving those responsible for medical and event oversight. Fans directed enormous anger toward Williams. Some of that anger continues today. But if Prichard's death becomes nothing more than an excuse to send hatred toward one person, then boxing misses the larger lesson. Williams later publicly expressed sorrow over what happened, saying that he prayed for Prichard and wished him peace and health. That does not erase what happened inside the ring. It does not erase the illegal punches. It does not erase Prichard's complaints. And it does not erase the devastating result. But boxing safety cannot depend only on hoping two fighters behave perfectly while trying to defeat each other. There are officials for a reason. There are doctors for a reason. There are regulations for a reason. When a fighter is hurt, somebody has to be willing to become unpopular for 30 seconds in order to protect the next 30 years of that fighter's life. Stop the fight. Ignore the boos. Ignore the television schedule. Ignore the undefeated record. Ignore the pride. Because the brain does not understand any of those things. Prichard's story is what happens when we learn that lesson too late, and yet reducing him to a warning would also be unfair. Because Prichard was more than the worst thing that happened to him. He was a young Puerto Rican fighter with charisma. He was a son, a brother, a dreamer, a prospect who believed 16 victories were only the beginning. And after 2015, he became something else, a symbol of endurance. In 2021, the World Boxing Council honored Prichard as an honorary champion. There was no title fight, no championship combination, no referee raising his hand after 12 rounds. But by then, everybody understood that Prichard had been fighting something far larger than another boxer. His opponent was time. His opponent was neurological damage. His opponent was frustration. His opponent was a body that no longer obeyed him the way it once did. And beside him in every round stood his family. Especially his mother. That is why when people talk about Prichard Colon's strength, his family deserves to be mentioned in the same sentence. Imagine waking up every morning for years knowing your child needs you for almost everything. Imagine watching old footage of him running, laughing, boxing, and dreaming. Then turning around and helping him through another therapy session. Imagine wondering every night what his life would have looked like if one evening in Virginia had ended differently. Would he have become a champion? Would he have married? Would he have had children? Would he have walked into an arena in Puerto Rico with a world title around his waist? Would we be talking about one of Puerto Rico's boxing legends instead of one of boxing's most painful tragedies? Those questions have no answers. And perhaps the cruelest part is that Prichard was never given the chance to find out. At 23, most lives are still unwritten. Prichard's future seemed enormous. Then, one night narrowed everything. But his family spent the next 11 years proving that a changed life is still a life. That is why those rehabilitation videos mattered. That is why the smiles mattered. That is why birthdays mattered. That is why taking him outside mattered. Because every ordinary moment became something extraordinary after doctors had delivered such devastating expectations. Prichard turned 30, then 31, then 32. He reached 33. An age nobody inside that hospital could have guaranteed during those first desperate nights in 2015. And now there will be no 34th birthday, no next rehabilitation update, no next video of his mother encouraging him, no next moment where longtime followers study his face and say, "Look, he reacted." No final vacation to Puerto Rico. The boxing world has now begun saying goodbye. Major organizations including the WBC and WBO publicly mourned him after his death was announced, remembering a fighter whose battle continued long after his professional career ended. And maybe this is the moment boxing has to decide what remembering Prichard really means. Because posting his photograph is easy, calling him a warrior is easy, writing "Rest in Peace, Champion" is easy. The harder tribute is making sure another fighter is heard when he says his head hurts. The harder tribute is a referee stopping a fight 1 round too early instead of 1 round too late. The harder tribute is a ringside doctor choosing caution when the crowd wants action. The harder tribute is a corner telling its own fighter, "Your future matters more than tonight." That would honor Prichard. Because his legacy should not become important only after somebody else gets hurt. His name should matter before the next rabbit punch, before the next complaint is ignored, before the next disoriented fighter hears someone tell him to be tough, before another mother spends 11 years wondering what might have been. And perhaps that is why his story continues to affect people who never met him. You do not have to be Puerto Rican. You do not have to understand boxing. You do not even have to enjoy combat sports. You only have to understand what it means to love somebody. A parent looking at their child and imagining decades of life ahead. A young man believing he has time. A family thinking there will always be another birthday, another vacation, another chance. Until suddenly, there isn't. For years, the most painful images of Prichard showed what boxing had taken from him. But maybe those should not be the images we end with. Instead, remember the fighter before everything changed. Young, confident, 16-0. 13 knockouts. Hands raised, dreaming bigger. Remember the family surrounding him afterward. His mother refusing to give up. His father continuing to hope. His loved ones celebrating every tiny victory. Remember that for 221 days, he remained in a coma and still came back to his family. Remember that doctors could describe the damage, but they could never measure how much his family loved him. And remember that when the end finally arrived, almost 11 years later, his father did not talk about championships. He talked about his son's dream of going home. Puerto Rico. That was the trip they could not complete. But perhaps in another sense, Prichard has finally gone somewhere beyond hospital rooms, therapy appointments, wheelchairs, and pain. His father said he believed his son was now in a better world. For a family that watched him struggle for so long, those words carry both unbearable grief and a kind of peace. Prichard Colon never became the champion he intended to become. He never got the career the 16-0 fighter deserved the chance to chase. He never got to discover how far his talent could carry him. But he did become unforgettable. Not because of the punches he threw, because of the fight he survived. Not for 10 rounds, for almost 11 years. So tonight, boxing does not need another argument. It needs a moment of remembrance. For the 23-year-old who entered the ring believing his future was waiting. For the 33-year-old whose family finally had to say goodbye. For the mother who refused to let the world forget him. For the father who tried to take his son home one last time. And for every fighter who will enter a ring tomorrow, trusting the people around them to recognize the moment courage becomes danger. If Prichard Colon's story touched you, leave a message for his family below. Leave a Puerto Rican flag. Tell us where you are watching from. And instead of filling the comments with hatred, write something Prichard's family can be proud to read, because they carried this fight longer than anybody. For almost 11 years, they stayed beside him. For almost 11 years, they protected him. For almost 11 years, they showed the world that although boxing had taken Prichard's career, it had not taken away his value as a human being. And now, after the longest fight of his life, Prichard Colon can finally rest. 16 victories, 13 knockouts, 1 terrible night, 221 days in a coma, nearly 11 years of fighting afterward, 33 years of life. And one name boxing should never forget. Prichard Colon. Rest in peace, champion.